Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. We have spent a lot of time this week discussing and writing about the Big Ten championship matchup between Penn State and top-ranked Oregon. Our good friend Josh Pate, who you should see across the 24/7 Sports Network in recent years. He's also a national analyst with CBS Sports. He made a trip up the Happy Valley this week. He's part of CBS's coverage for this matchup, and we're going to get him on right now for a bit of a bonus episode for our podcast plan this week. And Josh, always glad to get you back on board, especially when you're fresh out of Happy Valley. We've seen you around in the summer and the preseason. We've never seen you here during Big Ten championship game week.
Yeah, how about that? I didn't even know I was going to be up there. A little behind the scenes now. So I'm at the Texas A&M game Saturday, and I would be lying if I told you we hadn't already booked our travel to Columbus, because I was scheduled for a sit down with Ryan Day for the CBS coverage for the Big Ten championship. And then there's like that needle scratch and everyone sees the Michigan-Ohio State outcome. And went up to Penn State yesterday. Spent a good part of the afternoon with the team there, with James Franklin, sat down with him. I assume that'll air in the pregame, the lead up to the Big Ten championship game. But I know there's been a lot of talk about whether it's strategic to be in a conference title game or to rest up and get that first round home playoff game. There's not an ounce of that around that building. There's not an ounce of that. They are as fired up to be playing for a conference championship as you could possibly imagine. And I know we'll talk about it here, but the biggest takeaway for me so far in this Penn State season is, number one, how the corner position has worked out for them. But then number two, sort of existentially, how they handled themselves after the Ohio State loss. Most of the country, Tyler, thought, they'll probably make the playoffs, but they won't do anything in the playoffs. But their season's kind of decided at this point. He got booed a little bit walking off the field after that game. And I talked to him about that in the thing that we'll air for CBS. But I think it is so underrated how hard it is to deal with that and then just filter it out, and you come right back to work, and you get right back to work if you're a player. And they ended up being a better team because of that. And there are, of course, guys defensively clicking into place. You've got Tyler Warren doing what he's done all year. I know there's a little bit of question about the health of the receiver room, but just holistically, I think you got to be proud of what this team's been able to do after the Ohio State game.
You mentioned it. This doesn't seem like a program that would prefer to sit around, wait out, watch the Big Ten championship game, then find out who they're playing in that first round of the playoffs. Can you kind of give us the energy that you kind of were able to pick up on? You kind of stuck your head into the beehive, and then you went back to Tennessee. So in those few hours that you were in team facilities, what did you pick up on?
Yeah, so there's a lot of excitement, as there should be. It's not surprised excitement. It's not, wow, I just won $70,000 on a scratch-off ticket. It's, we worked for something, we planned for something, and that something happened. Now, it may have been a big, oh, wow moment on the Saturday that it happened, but it's not that they feel like they're out of place and I can't believe we're in this position. It's none of that. The other part of that is there is a premium focus in that building right now of making sure people understand you're supposed to be here. And this is a hard thing, especially for teams that aren't there every year. There's this tendency sometimes, individually and collectively, to have a process, to stick to it, and it works for you, and it works so good you get to a certain level, i.e. a conference championship game. Well, the great hiccup sometimes is when people get to a different level, they think a different kind of performance is needed. They need 120% of themselves. And there's a premium in building this week of reminding folks, the version of you, the version of us that we are was good enough to get here. Don't mistake it and think anything more than who we are is needed to go and win Saturday. We're not some 20 or 30 point underdog. It's like a field goal spread. It's neutral field. It's there in Indianapolis. It's a team we haven't played since the mid-90s. But we've got the opportunity because who we are is good enough. Now, we got to execute. We got to do all the things that you have to do every week. But I don't think the messaging is any different just because there happens to be more externally at stake for the matchup.
You mentioned it was a bit of whiplash on Saturday. That went for us. We got to Beaver Stadium checking in for our work day. All figured, Ohio State's going to handle business. all of a sudden we're all trying to figure out flight plans and arrangements for Indianapolis before halftime of the Maryland matchup. And so just like you, and I think people inside the facility were also surprised what happened in Columbus last Saturday. Now that the rematch is no longer on the table between Oregon and Ohio State, what do you make of this matchup? As you said, haven't seen these two teams go toe-to-toe since the January 95 Rose Bowl. What do you think about these two sharing the field in Lucas Oil Stadium?
Yeah, I'm really, really interested to go back to what we mentioned a couple of minutes ago. Penn State at corner. That secondary in general, but specifically the corner position, I think it's been one of the best not underreported, but underrated stories in college football this year, only because it worked out. So you and I were talking in spring. I told you in spring. I was talking to you on the phone the other day. I told you then. I'll tell you again while we're on the pod. My biggest question and then my biggest green check mark has been the concept that Penn State was just going to go into the portal and need to get 2 starting corners out of the portal. And normally it's hard to do that, 1. To do it, 2, is extremely difficult. And they did it with Kimber. They did it with Harris. It's been amazing to watch. And so I was at the Oregon-Ohio State game earlier this year, and it was very obvious that Ohio State's DBs could not deal with what Oregon presents to you in the pass catching game. I want to see Penn State play against them. Abdul Carter doing what he's doing, and then that combined with what they have, whether it be at safety or whether it be at corner, I'm excited to see how they match up with them. There's a world where they present a more uniquely different problem defensively for Oregon than anyone has all year. There's very much a world where I see that. And if that happens, it turns it into a more grinder of a game instead of a game that's played in the high 20s, low 30s. And if that happens, I think most of the country, Tyler, believes Oregon is like a significant, solid favorite in this game. They're not. They're a slight favorite in this game. And I think a lot of that defensive profile is the reason for that.
You mentioned Abdul Carter. We've got a close look at him all season long. Kind of baby steps early on in non-conference play, getting used to that new role. But Big Ten action came, and he was Mr. Consistent. Finishes with 10 sacks in the regular season. First Nittany Lion to get to that number since 2015, actually. What do you make of kind of the revelation he's been at defensive end, putting himself in a lot of award conversations and certainly top 10 NFL draft discussion as well?
Yeah. We did a special feature with Coach above and beyond just the sit down that they'll probably air at some point in the broadcast Saturday about Abdul Carter, about the number 11 at Penn State and the significance. Everyone listening to this knows all about that. I think most people listening to this would recall Abdul Carter's recruiting story. No one knows that story nationally, though. And I think James Franklin sort of reiterated that. I looked at him and I looked at his skill set out of high school, and it screamed defensive end to me, but him and his dad were dead set at linebacker. All right, well, that happens a lot. It happens a lot that you evaluate a guy at one position, but he's adamant that he wants to play another position. Now, normally it's a wide receiver who should be playing DB, or it's a quarterback out of high school who really should be playing wide receiver. But sometimes it is a linebacker that should try and develop at defensive end. All right, here's the important part. They didn't push it early on. They put him at linebacker. He was good at linebacker, and it really wasn't until he realized I may be better suited for defensive end that staff said, all right, well, it's about time. All right, now let's make it happen. You could have forced the issue. They could have forced the issue a year ago, 2 years ago. They didn't, and everyone remains happy. Team's still good, and he has a chance. I mean, he has a chance to be one of the most important players in this postseason now.
Important players. They don't get much more important than Tyler Warren for this Penn State team. We knew he was going to be important. We didn't know just how much he was going to reign in this offense and really within the locker room. Pretty quiet guy. I know you've probably had a chance to talk with him in the past, but everyone's done a lot of talking for him. And James Franklin lately has really been pounding the table for the Mackey Award, for the Hornig Award, for the Heisman Trophy, even for a tight end in Tyler Warren. We know he runs the ball a lot. He's been throwing the ball occasionally. He has been absolutely money as a pass target. How would you describe what he has done this season and maybe, putting him among some of the best we've seen at tight end in recent memory?
I think if he were more mouthy and played in more high-profile games this year, he'd probably be in New York City. I believe that. So with the Heisman, sometimes the last thing that's considered is the actual just nuts and bolts body of work. I have agreed with James Franklin about this. Like if I'm voting, he's one of my finalists. He's in New York. He's not going to win the award. He ought to absolutely be a Heisman finalist. But like you said, he's very quiet. He just goes about his business, does his job at a high level. Now you would think, okay, that sounds like slam dunk Heisman finalist. Not always. Not always. A lot of times it's how much do you get promoted? It's how many headlines do you garner? It's just stupid stuff. But and that's not to say the guys who will be there have done it the wrong way. It's just the process itself has always disenfranchised me a little bit. I agree with him about the Mackey. They might as well ship that thing to the Lash building. That one's, I think, a slam dunk. That one's done. But even the Heisman conversation, I agree. And then thirdly, we've gotten to December now. So Tyler Warren's not a secret. I remember being in, where was I? I think it was the day Oregon played Ohio State, where Penn State played at USC. I remember being up in that press box pregame, and everyone's glued to the TV saying, he's got 14 catches, 15 catches, 16. It looks like a good year for a receiver, and he's got it in one afternoon. But he's not a secret to anyone anymore. Every defense goes in game planning saying, man, we can't let 44 beat us. He does anyway. Will Oregon be any different? That's going to be really fun to watch. You don't shut him down. No one is stupid enough to think we're just going to shut him down. We can't let him destroy us.
How about Drew Aller? He's a guy that we've brought up in conversation with you. Every time you've come on the last couple of years, he was the chosen one, the number one overall quarterback recruit, sat behind Sean Clifford in year one, was up and down a bit as a sophomore, took care of the football. He continues to take care of the football as a junior, no turnovers in the last 4 games, but his completion percentage is up by about 12 points from last year. He's certainly been a more fiery leader, a demonstrative guy out there on the field, chatting with defenders, different demeanor out there on the football field. How do you feel about him heading into this matchup? And fair or not, nationally, he is largely still defined by what he has not accomplished in some of these marquee matchups against Ohio State, against Michigan. Maybe you factor in the Peach Bowl last December. But nationally, when people have focused in on Penn State and Drew Aller, it hasn't always been pretty. It cost the offensive coordinator his job at one point. What do you think about this opportunity, this platform for Aller and to some degree, offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki?
I mean, as far as the national narrative, I would say who cares if I'm him? I mean, who cares? Because your career's not done. You've still got the ability to totally rewrite all that. And that's even if you care about it to begin with. You want to go beat Oregon because you want to beat Oregon, not you want to beat Oregon to change what people say about you. At least that shouldn't be your motivation. I don't think it is his motivation. But I think what you're seeing is something people don't allow for. You're seeing pretty slow but steady progression. Okay, well, people either want you to be an outright failure or an outright success immediately relative to their expectation level. That's not the way it works in coaching or playing. That's not the way it works. So I'm thinking to myself, sure, you'd love for Penn State to win it all, win the national title. That'd be a dream season. What if he plays really well, they win a first-round game in the playoff, and then they lose to a better team in the second round? And Drew Aller plays good against Oregon. He plays good in that first game. That scenario is also progress. That scenario also sets you up for what should be a really big 2025. I think that there's been progression, which deserves credit. I also do think you don't have to have followed him day by day to see. It feels like he's the general a lot more this year. It feels like it's his team a lot more this year, which makes perfect sense. That's the way it should go. But what excites me about guys like him is, for all the noise out there, the book's not done being written. So you got to be careful when you start labeling, again, players or coaches when they're still in their prime years, because they can make you think they look dumb. They can make you look really dumb over the course of 1 4-quarter game. They could change the entire talk about them.
We've covered a lot of ground on Penn State here. Let's finish with this, Josh. You've been around the Oregon program. You've been out to Eugene this season for their biggest win of the year over Ohio State. Tell our listeners, our audience, what they need to know about Oregon, what they're going to bring to the field, what you see as the biggest challenges presented to Penn State on Saturday.
Very good coaching staff, very good at identifying mismatches. I wonder about, the right tackle position with Penn State. How predictable do you get in the run game because of maybe vulnerability you have there? They'll key on that. They will be as athletic and multiple up front defensively as any group that you've seen this year. They'll give you more pre-snap looks. They'll simulate pressures. They are very deep and also multiple at pass catcher. And when I say multiply, it's just not, it's not like a 5 of the same guy got rolled off the assembly line. They're just, they don't beat themselves. This year's version of Oregon hasn't beaten themselves. That doesn't mean they're not beatable. It means you're going to have to go get the job done, which is what you should expect when you're playing in a conference championship game.
Josh Pate's college football show available on YouTube. If you haven't been watching it all season, you've been missing out, but the postseason's here now. A lot of conversation to be stirred up. Check out Josh's coverage across the 24/7 Sports Network on CBS Sports. And as he said, he spent some time in Happy Valley for a reason this week. You're going to check out some coverage of his leading up to this matchup on CBS on Saturday night. Josh, appreciate the perspective. We'll see how it shakes up if Penn State can claim its first Big Ten title since 2016. Either way, I think we got some playoffs to look forward to down the road in December. Enjoy your week. A lot to discuss, and thanks for taking some time for us.
All right, brother. Pleasure as always.
All right. Good stuff from Josh Pate. We will catch up with him down the road. We have a lot coming your way this weekend at Lions247.com. Daniel Gallen, Mark Brennan on location at Lucas Oil Stadium, along with our photographer, Grace Brennan. They'll be around for team arrival. They'll be around for all the pregame warmups. We've mentioned it. Some personnel questions, some injury questions will get sorted out during those pre-games. We'll have an opportunity to provide updates at Lions247.com. And, of course, once this thing kicks off, stay locked into our post-game coverage at Lions247.com. That's the podcast that's going to include our grades. It's going to include commentary from the Nittany Lions locker room and James Franklin. Win or lose, there will be a lot to discuss. And then don't forget, right away on Sunday, we're locked in to find out what the playoff schedule is going to look like, where Penn State lands, who they're going to play. Maybe they have a bye week. A lot to learn this upcoming weekend about the Nittany Lions and their postseason fate. But for now, we're going to step aside, get back to work at Lions247.com. We hope you enjoyed this bonus episode. Always good to get Josh Pate back on the podcast. Stepping aside for now, I am Tyler Donahue, and this has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.